Brighton 2, Manchester City 1, and I feel like after tonight we are genuinely at a point where we can look at this Manchester City team and have an uncomfortable conversation about whether or not they have fallen off this season. Up until this point, I was very reluctant to make a video criticizing Manchester City because it's akin to criticizing Real Madrid. You just don't do it because you know at the end of the season they're going to make you eat humble pie. But then I got to thinking, hang on a minute, 4 games in a row where Manchester City have lost on the bounce in all competitions. We have not seen that under Pep Guardiola anywhere, whether it's at Bayern or Barca or now currently where he is at Manchester City. This is, I believe, the worst losing streak of his managerial career so far, if I'm not mistaken, which is crazy. It is absolutely absurd. So when you couple that with the fact that Manchester City have been poor for a long time, even in the games that they have won, it is not looking good. And I don't know why Manchester City are so bad. I think Rodri being out is definitely a huge factor. But even then, Manchester City usually are able to scrape their way through these difficult periods, regardless of who's injured in the team, whether it's De Bruyne, whether it's Rodri, whether it's Stones, whether it's Oscar Bob, whoever is missing in the team, whether it's a young academy player with a bright future or a pivotal senior player, such as the likes of Rodri, such as the likes of Bernardo Silva. They've always been able to soldier through it in the past. And yet this season, it feels genuinely different. It feels so different. I mean, the game against Spurs was awful. They got knocked out of the Carabao Cup. They then got beat by a very scintillating, entertaining and shell-shocking Bournemouth team this season who have got some pretty decent performances and results against some big teams this season. They then lost to Sporting 4-1 in a shock because that first half, I thought Manchester City looked controlled. They looked poised. It looked like a vintage typical Manchester City performance. It wasn't the best performance by any means, that's not what I'm saying, but it looked like it was going to be a typical Man City game where they were just going to dominate possession and find a way to nick a goal and then just win it at the end. That's what it felt like. They were just going to get a 1-0 lead and then maintain it throughout the game and just see it out. And somehow they didn't. Sporting came back, scored 4 goals, and boom, all of a sudden Manchester City are in a crisis. And then they, as if that wasn't bad enough, they go and lose tonight to Brighton, which is crazy. I can't even wrap my head around what happened tonight because Manchester City, obviously, in the first half, looked pretty decent, barring the last 10 minutes. I think it was arguably one of their better performances of the entire season, if I'm being honest. I thought the goal from Haaland was really good. Again, Haaland is another one of these players who is kind of, his ability is downplayed because, yes, he is known for his goal scoring, but goal scoring has so many aspects to it. There's movement, there's timing, there's alertness and concentration in addition to your ball striking ability. And Haaland, I think, because he's such a one-dimensional player, his ability and how good he is at that one dimension kind of doesn't get appreciated enough. It's almost used as a stick to beat him with. People say that he is not a quote-unquote good footballer, and it's taken as an insult by some people when we should actually be saying, no, even though he's not a good footballer, this guy's really good at this one thing, and this one thing is really difficult and really important. It can be the difference between titles and coming second place. It can be the difference between Champions Leagues and not winning the Champions League. It is a huge part of the game, and it should not be used as something to downplay his ability, but rather it should be something that we celebrate, something that we look at and we praise. And as a rival fan, I have to put my hands up today. Haaland is just sensational, even though Manchester City are not so sensational right now. Apart from him, not really anything else to talk about. I thought Gundogan was pretty good, and I thought, like I said, that first half was pretty decent from City, but then it felt like Brighton just grew into the game. That last 10 minutes of the first half and large parts of the second half, it felt like Brighton were the better team. It felt like Brighton were engineering chances. They were more creative. They were more direct. They knew when to recycle possession and try to sustain possession, and also when to quickly go for the ball over the top. They weren't afraid to mix it up, Brighton. They were playing with a freedom, an ebb and flow that you almost feel Manchester City should be playing with. It feels like Manchester City have almost been overcoached by Pep Guardiola, and the creativity has been sucked out of that team, and the shackles are not being let loose. And I won't lie, it looks like Pep Guardiola is running out of ideas with this Manchester City team because the creativity is just not there. Today we saw 2 teams with a completely contrasting mood. One team that was just trying to close out a 1-0 lead, and the other team that was actually there to play football. And that's crazy to say about a team that is on course to be one of the best teams in history. It's crazy to say that about a team that has won a four-peat, won a treble recently, and is just amazing, right? There's not much else I can say about how good this Manchester City team are historically, but right here, right now, they are not good. And honestly, I think some uncomfortable conversations need to be had about this Manchester City team. Now, I've seen some people suggesting that Pep Guardiola could be leaving at the end of the season. All of a sudden now because of this Brighton game, and I think people are taking it a little bit too far. Yes, there have been reports over the last several years suggesting that Pep Guardiola is going to leave at the end of the season or the end of the next season, or he's not going to sign a new contract and blah, blah, blah. We see these reports all the time. We saw it with Klopp in Liverpool for a very long time until he inevitably announced it himself. I think we just need to wait for Pep Guardiola to announce that publicly, and I think he probably will say something publicly if he is to leave Manchester City. I don't think there's any point speculating, and I don't think there's any water in those arguments at the moment. I mean, we're in November, for crying out loud. Maybe in February, March, if Manchester City are still in crisis, we can have those conversations, but I think it's way too soon right now. I think the conversations we should be having right now is Pep Guardiola running out of ideas, right? How big of a mess is Rodri really? Because we're starting to see the impact of this guy not being there. Is Kevin De Bruyne still able to play at this level and impact games for Manchester City when they need intensity, when they need momentum, when they need something quick here right now? They don't need somebody who's just going to come on and dictate the play and play when Manchester City are comfortable and controlling possession, right? Can Kevin De Bruyne carry Manchester City through the dirt? I don't know. I don't know. I feel like when I see De Bruyne play nowadays for Manchester City, he still is a remarkably good technical player, but he doesn't have the legs. And it just feels like there's only certain type of games where you can rely on De Bruyne to actually do something. And that game was not tonight. Tonight, Manchester City needed intensity. Tonight, Manchester City needed legs. They needed to stay in that game. 1-0 was not enough against Brighton. And you felt like when Kevin De Bruyne came on, yes, they gained a bit of creativity, but they lost the legs completely and Brighton could overrun them. And I'm not saying that De Bruyne is the reason that Manchester City conceded and Manchester City lost. I'm just saying this is an uncomfortable conversation we need to have, and one of the additional factors as to why Manchester City are going down the drain. I mean, the selling of Julian Alvarez and not replacing him, another big decision. One that I won't understand. I understand Julian Alvarez leaving. I don't understand why Manchester City didn't replace him, is the point I'm trying to make. So there's a few conversations we need to have. Pep Guardiola leaving is not one we need to have right now, but there's a lot we do need to have about Manchester City's lack of activity in the transfer window and just where they go from here. It looks like Pep Guardiola's running out of ideas. And can you blame him? This man has been reinventing the wheel at Manchester City for a long time now. Eventually, he's going to run out of ideas. Are we at that point now? I think it's a fair conversation to have when a manager is currently on the worst losing streak of his career. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you did make it this far in the video, I appreciate you so much, and I hope that you have a great rest of your Saturday evening or whenever you're watching this. Leave a comment on the video if you want to support the channel, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Road to 1K. It's been your boy Triple M. Peace!